absolutely delighted to be here this morning with our friends from Accenture Interactive for this event. The occasion for it is that we launched Wired 10 years ago in the UK, and Accenture Interactive is 10 years, celebrating its 10-year anniversary as well. So there's a nice kind of serendipity there. Clearly, just from kind of strolling around here, you can see just the incredible changes that have occurred over the last decade in every industry, from sort of fintech through to healthcare, security, through to finance. And we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the changes that we're going to be we've seen happening, and some of the changes that we think are coming down the road in the next 10 years. There are going to be 5 areas that we think are kind of fairly crucial to examine, and we're going to be looking at them in detail this morning: technology, education, urban planning, inequality, and healthcare. And we have 5 expert speakers here who are going to talk for a little while about what they thought was going to happen over the last 10 years, what actually happened, and then what they think is going to be happening next in the coming years. But first of all, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Glenn Hartman, the lead of Accenture Interactive for North America, to say a few words.
Thank you. I didn't do anything. You're already clapping. That's so sweet. Thanks. So how hot is everyone? Is everyone okay? Like the fans, did everyone get the... Yeah. So I was going to do something just to set the context for these great speakers that we have today. I don't know if you've heard, but there's this word that keeps being thrown around. Across the world, it's experience. Everybody's into experience now instead of not just marketing, not just advertising. And we think of experience in a very, very different way at Accenture Interactive. And I wanted to talk about it, but I thought instead of doing that, I think everyone's just been a little too comfortable just sitting back and kind of chilling, and it's con, and we're all still hungover from last night and the rest. So I thought I'd make everyone as uncomfortable as possible. You guys up for that? We'll do a little exercise, yeah? So I've done this before. Never on a boat, never in a jam-crammed place like this. So I'm going to actually ask you to do something. You're going to have to stand up, you're going to have to move, and you have to get a little space. So you're going to have to crowd over to that people a little bit. I'm going to show you what we're going to do. It's a 30-second thing, so it'll be uncomfortable, but only for 30 seconds, okay? So normally the way this goes, the idea here is to try and look at experience a little bit differently, instead of just the way people may think of it, like UX or experience of an app or experience of a website, something like that. So Greg and I are going to demonstrate how we're going to do this, okay? So Greg, if you just stand straight and put your arms, yeah, you're doing great, by the way, that was excellent. So yeah, so normally what you would do is, if you have a lot of space, one person would stand straight and the other person would do this. They put their fist out and hold their fist like that, okay? You want me to hold my fist out? No, you keep your hands, yes, just like that. You're still excellent, right? And so now, because it's so cramped, if, like, say you guys became partners, you might have to kind of do it like that, right? It's still the whole idea. So you can just be careful. There's stairs here, okay? So no one, please don't fall down the stairs, because it'll be my responsibility. And we're on Accenture Interactive, and this is the Accenture Interactive boat, and we don't have insurance. So just be careful on the stairs. So you'll have to spread it just a little bit, and then what happens is, the way the game goes, it's only 30 seconds, is that Greg's job is to get my hand open by any means possible. Physical, words, anything you want to do, you can do for those 30 seconds, okay? So we're not going to do it. I don't want to give them any clues, but that's the whole thing, right? So one person stands straight, the other one maybe like this, whatever, but get the fist so they can at least reach it. I'll tell you when you have 20, we'll find a place to do it, and I'll say 1, 2, 3, go, and then we'll do 30 seconds. Yeah? All right, go for it.
It's a really simple explanation of how to do this. I can't figure it out. I can give you a British passport, maybe.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. You have 30 seconds. All right, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. Okay, time's up, everybody. Grab your chairs, grab your seats. Okay. Okay, all right, let's see how we did. All right. by a show of hands, did anyone anybody not get it open? Not get it open. Was anyone? Oh, okay, over here, the handsome gentleman on the right. You didn't. What did you try? You said hello, high five. Didn't work. Nothing, right? Nothing at all. Okay. Let's see. Someone else that didn't get it open. Anybody else right over here? What did you guys do?
I tried everything possible.
Wow. Okay. Did you guys just meet, or is it a?
The final thing was I tried kissing her hand and I hope she would record.
Wow. That's pretty good. So the kiss was not welcome, wasn't it? No, you guys just met, or have you been together? You have. So, and this is the first time he's tried to kiss you, then? That is correct? That's good. Well, it's just the hand. That's good. But still, no go. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyone else not get it open? Yes, here.
They both tried to get my hands open. She tickled me.
Tickling. Okay, that's good.
He was too scared to hurt me, so he wasn't trying that much.
So I don't understand. He said he was going to hurt you, and he decided against it?
I could just tell he didn't want to hurt me, so he was being
Oh, he was too. You were looking for more from him in a more aggressive way. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes gentle is not the way to go. So, but I like to know the tickling thing. Was it because you weren't ticklish, or was her technique not?
everything else was working.
Yeah, but are you ticklish in general? Would it normally work? Yeah. All right. Well, I'm thinking. All right. Let's do someone that actually made it work. Who got it open? What'd you guys try? Okay, good. You asked him to open it. Would you please open your hand? And it worked, right? Yeah. So let's have a round of what's your name? Say it one more time. Incan. Wow, pretty name. So the most common and best way to do it is to just ask. So round of applause. Right? Yeah. So, okay. Anybody else have another technique that they did to get it open? Over here? Yeah. You have a mic? Yeah. Go ahead.
He asked me to open my hand. I said no.
No. And then what happened?
Then he asked, "Do you have love in your hand?" And I said yes.
Wow. Okay, philosophical. I've done this a lot of times. I didn't know it was like an existential boat, but it's great. It's good. I feel like we're having meaning for the session today. Thank you. So one more. Anybody else have a different technique? Yeah, go ahead. Put it on shaking. Great. Okay, so you guys can probably see where this metaphor is going. I'm just curious. The second most popular way to normally do this is to ask somebody, well, what would it take for me to open your hand? Because if you get to know what they want or what they need, it might be helpful for you to get to a quicker way to do that. Another one, did anyone try bribery? Yes? Okay, there was some bribery. And now I'm just curious, on the bribery part, did it work right away, or did you have to kind of offer up different things?
Just try once, but she got
How much? What'd you do? You didn't offer money? Say that again?
We were negotiating.
Oh, yeah, and what kind of negotiation happened? Did you have to keep upping the price?
How much do you offer?
Yeah? So now, is this his boat now? Is that the... Yeah? Well, the reason why I ask is that sometimes we notice that the incentive has to change as well. So you might start off with, 5 pounds or francs or dollars, and then that's not enough, and you have to keep going because you don't know exactly what his price is, for instance. Or it could be maybe another offer. It's not even money. It could be some service or something else. Not that I want to get into that. I was just suggesting that could be an option. So the reason why I'm saying is if you can think of the correlation of the way that you start to engage with customers, it goes way beyond advertising. It really, truly is. The theory that we have at Accenture Interactive, you see, is that brands are a set of promises. And the way those promises are kept are through the experience. And the more relevant you can get through that experience and get people engaged is really the key. So you can find out different things about people to be able to get them the right message, or maybe understand things that would move them to do something, to take action, and to actually remember the brand. So when we're talking about experience in this way, I'm encouraging everyone to start to think of that kind of level of engagement to get people to come along on their own terms. And it can be manifested itself in even very tactical things. Let's say we use this incentive idea that you had. It could be something as simple as a banner ad or an email. I don't know, it's like 72% of all people use preview pay in an email. So you need to have the offer up on top because they're not going to scroll below, right? You'd never get to it, for instance. So this idea of understanding where and how to communicate to get people to take action through branding and advertising and how that promise is delivered is much more related to experience than it is to any messaging that you have. And the last part of all this that I think may set some context, since we're going to be talking about such big things like education and other important topics, is to find meaning. So I don't know our existential Jean-Paul Sartre gentleman in the back, but this idea of having some kind of purpose inside of your brand has always been talked about, but being able to have that be manifested through the experience is one of the things that Accenture Interactive is very passionate about. And we're working with clients today to be able to help find purpose and meaning in almost anything that we do, from new experiences or identifying new ways to reinvent an experience for the emergency room in a hospital or for cancer research and big things like that, but all the way down to understanding even the mundane. And I'll just finish with mundane, because you always want to go out on a big note. But there's one idea that we were thinking of with a CPG company, for instance, was the mundane. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with this particular product based on my hair challenges, but we were looking at shampoo. Now, you can't get too much more mundane than shampoo, and brand advertising for that is a challenge. But when you start to think about this idea of engagement, maybe you would buy the shampoo not because you know that brand, or not because you also buy their soap, or you also buy other products. Maybe you would buy it because you care about the environment, and they are safe to the environment when they manufacture. Or maybe because you have an allergy and you need certain ingredients. Or maybe you would do it because when you shampoo your daughter's hair in the morning before she goes to nursery school, it doesn't make her cry, and you have a better morning because she's less stressed, you are less stressed after, and this whole engagement for how you start your day is actually helpful to you. I just sensed it from the tickling stuff. So there's but this idea is to start to change the mindset. So think of this one thing: when you start to find purpose, and it's not what people are buying, but why they buy it. And also the idea of moving past advertising and marketing into something more. And I'll just finish by saying, think of different ways of even the language that we use as marketers. We're going to acquire customers. We're going to convert customers. I mean, just by a show of hands, how many people liked it and just felt great about the last time they were converted? Like, never. It's horrible, right? So if we start to even change the language and say, well, maybe we should be doing things to help customers, or team up with customers, or partner with them and assist in different ways. So I'm challenging all of us as marketers, as people in this industry, to think on these terms, because our clients are asking us to try and be more relevant to customers in very different ways and measure success in those ways. And with that, I'd love to hand it back to Greg so we can get into some specific examples around education and some of these other great topics.
Great, thanks, Glenn.
Thanks.
Can I ask you a favour?
Anything you say.
Can you come and do that exercise with the UK government when they're going to Brussels? So they can...
Done.
Thank you. That might help us all a great deal. So we're going to crack on now and talk about sort of something I think that is crucial to absolutely everyone in this room, and no matter what they do, whatever industry they're in. We're going to talk a little bit about technology. And here to discuss technology is Alexandra Naresi, who's MD of Accenture Interactive and leads R&D and oversees the Accenture Interactive Centre in Sofia Antipolis. It works with clients to incubate the next generation of digital solutions, some of which he's going to talk about this morning. Over to you, Alex.
Morning.
Morning.
All right, so we, in preparation of this talk, we actually looked back 10 years ago at some of the trends that were really big at this time. Compared this vision at that time to today, and then sort of wrapped our head around the next big trends for the next 10 years, which is a pretty difficult exercise actually. We are used to work with a 3 to 5 year horizon. We do those exercises with the field trends every year with the technology vision, and there are a number of exercises of strategic foresight led by Accenture Research and other parts of the organization. 10 years is pretty difficult. Now, going back 10 years ago, some of you might recall the SOLO-MO, social, mobile, local, right? I think that with regards to social, we At that time, you have to put things in perspective. Facebook only had 150 million users. Snapchat didn't exist, right? And I think that we've seen a huge uptake, and social has really transformed the way we work, the way we interact, of course. It has sparked movements, it has transformed nations. For this, I think we were right to start investing at a very early stage in social. And it really goes beyond putting brands on social channels, right? Mobile is another example where this has radically transformed the way we live, right? I think we've seen over the past 10 years evolutions in miniaturization, broadband, GPS. All of those technology advances have combined to create a something that's quite addictive actually, but that is really transforming our lives and experiences. Now, I'd like to mention a few other trends that we thought were big 10 years ago. Actually, interactive robots, for instance. Back in 2009, the Now robot was about a year old. A few years later came the Pepper robot. I remember when it was unveiled in Cannes. And at that time, we all thought that robots would take over our jobs, right? This didn't happen. Actually, they create jobs because when we deploy such robots in stores, you need to have at least 2 employees looking after the robots. So I think this is one development that actually was slower than what we expected. Now, I'd like to mention another trend that we saw coming. It was a weak signal at that time, but blockchain was actually invented a year before 2009, and actually Bitcoin was the very first invention, right? The very first application of this. This was a weak signal at the time, and I think that it's amazing to see the development over the past 10 years. There's been a lot of inflation and speculation, quite literally, around this, and we're going to see that in the next 10 years we're going to see some interesting developments. Obviously, with the announcement of Facebook, the crypto this week, this is actually something that we're watching very closly. Now, looking 10 years ahead, I think a big trend that was a weak signal, I think, was still in the winter 10 years ago is artificial intelligence, and this has been a major focus of our R&D over the past 10 years, and I think that this is probably where we're going to see the most impact, not just in experience, but in general in our lives. I think that the fact that we've seen the availability of massive amount of data, which is becoming increasingly accurate and increasingly real time, combining with very cheap computing power and advances, real breakthroughs and discoveries in areas such as deep learning and GAN. This has really the power to completely transform the world we live in the next 10 years. So it's something actually we've been working on. We're trying to always push the boundaries. We work 18 months ahead, I would say. We brought on the boat some examples of that, of bringing artificial intelligence in the creative process. We actually have an AI that's capable of generating ads, and a game downstairs you can actually come and play with, where you have to beat the AI generating ads. And behind the scenes, we are using artificial intelligence that mimics the way the human brain works. So we literally run eye tracking simulation, and we determine where the attention is going. Another prototype that we're bringing is about using AI to generate voice. There's been huge advances in natural language understanding. Now we use AI to generate new realities, to generate synthetic brand experiences, and we've got a great prototype downstairs that actually allows you to mix and literally sculpt and create the perfect brand voice based on personality traits. So instead of mixing sort of technical parameters, you actually mix whether you want this person extroverted or introverted like me, melodic, promotional, etc. So I think, if I could mention another big trend that we're seeing, it's I think around, but it's actually a very dual trend, right? It's quite a paradox, but I think that in the future, in the next 10 years, we're going to see on one hand far more natural interactions where technology will become completely transparent, completely absent. And that is going to fulfill a very human need. Today, we're completely addicted to our phones. In 10 years from now, we'll look at us and we'll find ourselves ridiculous. I think that technology advances will allow technology to disappear. And that's on one side of the spectrum. On the other side, I think that we're going to see advances in creating completely immersive and believable and memorable experiences. And we'll be able to switch from those natural experiences to those very immersive experiences that will feel and look real and create memories, actually. And that's the sort of paradox we have to work with. We'll strike the right balance between the two and understand how we will play, work, live in an environment where we'll be able to switch from one to the other. And now for the last part on blockchain, I won't speculate, right? But I think there are going to be some massive advances in this space, because when you think about it, it's there's going to be a need for trust and transparency, and this allows programmatically to create trust. It's really the first time we see that we can create code that's trusted and that can live, that can have its sort of independent life. And I think we're going to see some interesting developments. Now, maybe looking even farther ahead, I think that we are going to definitely need new ways to power all of those experiences, right? I think that energy is extremely key, and we'll have to invent new forms, new ways of using energy, of managing energy, in order to really power those experiences. That's pretty much about it.
I think you covered a lot of ground there. So thank you. A lot to unpack there, and we'll get into that in the panel session. But one of the things you talked about, which I think is absolutely crucial, is clearly automation and the way that AI is going to kind of impact all kinds of industries. And clearly one way of mitigating against that is we're going to need to really kind of rethink education. And fortunately, we have someone here to discuss this, actually from a brand that Wired writes about all the time because it's such an innovative brand. Julia Goulding is the Chief Marketing Officer at LEGO. She leads an 1,800-strong team spanning product development, marketing, research and insights, licensing and partnerships, and the LEGO Creative Agency and LEGO Education. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about this now. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be able to talk about this topic because it is something that is really important to us at LEGO. So let me start maybe just talking a little bit about why this particular topic is so important. At LEGO, you probably, okay, let me just ask a question. So how many of you have experience with LEGO? Great. And how many of you have seen kids experience LEGO? Great. So we have a mission in our company to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. And if any of you have seen how, or can relate to how you yourself experience LEGO when you build something, or when you see kids doing it, when they're starting to build, they're making mistakes, they're fixing their mistakes, maybe asking you for help, but then how amazingly proud and excited they feel once they've done it. Then you kind of know, you already kind of get a sense of why that mission is so critical and so important. But the reason why this mission is so important to us is because we know that when kids play, they learn. And that will be the critical piece that I want to talk about, because in my view, that's something that has been in the DNA of the Lego brand from the very inception. It was actually created on the premise that play is very important for children. And over the years, it has been confirmed more and more that when kids play, they learn. And what I think is the new news for us, or what has been stronger than we even predicted, is the importance of this type of learning. So what happens when kids play with Lego bricks? So the brick was created in 1958. We just celebrated its 60th anniversary, and every brick that has been created since 1958 fits with other bricks that we have created since. It's a huge system. And just 6 bricks, 2x4, same color, can make up to 915 million different combinations. And for each child, a combination is not a combination. It's a duck, it's a boat, it's a ship. It's something that they can imagine. But it's also something that they can create and they can build. And that's what's so unique about this kind of system and play, because when kids experience it, they actually learn. They learn many very important skills: creative problem solving, collaboration when they have to ask for help or build with others, systematic reasoning and thinking, because they have to go back and figure out why hasn't this fitted and how do I get it to fit, and a few other skills that are going to be absolutely critical for the 21st century. And we believe that these experiences, this hands-on, minds-on learning, is going to be more and more critical in the future. And let me tell you a couple of reasons why. The world around us is changing, right? We just heard about it. We just heard about technology and the value of technology. What's going to happen over time is the things that were so important in the past, which is knowledge, gaining knowledge, knowledge, and knowledge, and knowledge, is going to be actually less important, because knowledge is going to exist and it's going to be powered up by AI. We probably will all experience that in our lifetime, but for sure the next generations, will experience that. What's going to be more critical is how to actually use the knowledge, how to use the data, how to use technology and what's available to us. 65% of jobs of kindergartens, kids who are currently in kindergarten, will have jobs that don't currently exist today. Maybe it will be taking care of some robots, I don't know. But there will be jobs, they are going to have to be prepared for a future that is very difficult to predict. How do we best set them up for it? That's the question, and that's the question that we think a lot about. We think about it from a perspective of every experience that we deliver with Lego, whether it's something that you buy for your kid or you give to somebody that they do in their free time, or whether that's something that happens in the classroom. Let me talk a little bit more about this. So Alvin Toffler, who was a very famous futurist, he said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be people who cannot read and write. It will be people who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we believe that all of the experiences that we deliver have to deliver this very important skill to kids. And therefore, we need to make sure that they have, they're engaged and have relevance in this hands-on and minds-on learning. And what I mean by that is that you all experience children today. They live in a very different world. They live in a very fluid world. They live in a world where digital and physical, for us, it's screen time and then it's physical time. For them, it's one world. They want their games, they want experiences they engage in to be able to transition these two worlds. So we also cannot just say we will continue to deliver the same things over and over again and kids will just continue to play with them. We also need to transform what we do and make it super relevant. So what would be examples of that? We are incorporating technology and digital into experiences that we provide. For example, we have safe digital platforms for kids where they can upload their creations. They want to be just like adults. They want to share. But we want them to be able to do it in a safe digital environment. So we created Lego Life, a safe digital network for them to be able to share things. We incorporate technology into their experience. We're launching a theme in a couple of months called Hidden Side. It's going to incorporate augmented reality. So kids will build physical things, but then they will also have a game that they can play where their actual physical ghost town comes to life with ghosts that are flying around it. So, so we have to stay on our toes in the sense that, innovation is really important, and it's very important for what we do with Lego. Another good example is we're introducing City, in Lego City, which I'm sure all of you know, a space theme, which we worked out with NASA. So that's going to be a way for kids to actually get engaged with the moon landing and get engaged in it, not just in what they build physically, but also all of enormous amount of really interesting content that they can engage in, and a glimpse into what do real astronauts do. So that's about the things that happen in across kind of all of the things that we provide in Lego. But we also mentioned education. And education is also has to take a very important leap forward. I think most of countries now realize the importance of STEAM. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Everybody's talking about it. But if you actually think about how these things are being taught in schools, they're not being taught in a way that's democratic and embraces every child. Lego has been in education for over 30 years. We actually launched Lego Education, and we provide educational experiences for kids in schools. And it's really amazing to see. One of the really iconic one that you probably have heard about is Mindstorms. Who has heard of Lego Mindstorms? Okay, many of you. So it's where kids can build and they can program. And the first Lego Mindstorms was created in actually 20 years ago, in 1998, and it was created in MIT Media Lab at MIT. And the brilliant mind behind it was Sammy Pepper, who was an enormous force in also artificial intelligence and kind of a force in also thinking about how education system needs to transform. He was a major principal force behind one laptop for every child, if you've heard of that. And Samuel Papert, he said something very interesting, which I find very inspiring and very interesting. He said, if you actually take a doctor who existed in 1910 and transform him into 2010, into an operating room, a surgeon, he will not know what to do. Because, medicine has transformed completely. He will not know what to do. But if you take a teacher from 1910 and put him into 2010 classroom, he'll be just fine. Because the education system is not evolving enough. And what he meant by that is the importance of hands-on, minds-on learning. This importance of projectized learning, meaning that you don't just teach kids, all of the math formulas, all of the science formulas, because that's one way of teaching when kids have to remember and then they have to regurgitate back or take exams, whether it's multiple choice or they have to write out a lot of formulas, but whatever. There's a very different way of teaching them. And that different way is to get them hands-on, projectize, build something, see how it works, figure out how to make it work better. A little bit like the experiment we started with, right? If I couldn't have opened the hand, if you repeated this experiment 30 times, and every time you would feed us a little bit of a learning, I bet you we would all be able to open each other's hands, right? Because you would try different things. Well, that's exactly what we provide. And we're launching this year a new Lego learning system in schools. The first product is going to be called Spike Prime. It's coming out in a couple of months. And it's really designed to provide kids with an experience where they can build many different models for different themes in the STEAM arena. Very accessible to everybody. They build, they code, they see how it works, and then they learn how to get it to work better. And they can learn about weather, they can learn about physics, they can learn about math, engineering, science. We feel that this kind of learning is going to be critical, not just for kids, but also for teachers. Why? Because this learning, what's going to be important for 21st century skills? One of the most important ones is going to be confidence. Being confident that you can actually make mistakes, that you want to make mistakes because you want to try something out and you want to figure out how to make it work better. So we right now see that confidence, such a basic thing, is still missing when it comes to STEAM kind of learning. And it's interesting because teachers will say a third of their children are actually confident about STEAM. When you ask kids, they'll say 1/5. So even amongst both teachers and kids, there is a gap right now in how confident they feel that they can master these skills. At the heart of what we want to do is help each child to be more confident, whether they are playing at home or whether they are playing in school. But for sure, we feel that the education, just like everything else in our world, is going to have to become more fluid and more open in terms of different type of experiences that need to be provided. And when I say about education becoming more fluid, what I mean by that is that you all who touch children will have a very important role to play in a home environment, making sure that they continue to actually, through their experiences, build their confidence and learn new skills. And most importantly, learn this ability or gain this ability to be confident about learning and unlearning and relearning. So that's where we believe education is going. And if I were to look back and say, what did we know before and what do we know now? I think this gem of an idea, this little germ that started in, 20 years ago with Samuel Peppard and Mindstorms, I think now is becoming a much bigger trend because we can see that actually coming in very fluidly, not just into the educational products that we provide, but as I also mentioned, into the products that we actually deliver just for, free time, playtime, etc. Products that right now have coding, then we already have quite a few that have coding in it, AR, but I think in the future we have to start thinking about the fact that technology will actually start living in physical objects. And that's what I think the trend is going to be, that the next generations, just like has been said before, they will not split their time between screen and physical objects. In physical world, they will expect physical world to be as intelligent, as emotional, as responsive, as personalized as the digital world, as we know today. So that's, I think, what the future will be.
Great, thank you so much, Judah. Thank you, Judah. And what's interesting also, if you do go to the MIT Media Lab, still to this day, they have Mindstorms out on this, and they're still working on it and thinking about how it can be applied. So thank you so much. So our next speaker is going to be talking about something I think that really has sort of come to the fore in the last, really relatively recently, which is equality. It's now one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2020, and that means every single government in the world as part of the UN has signed up for it. Camila Newman is a colleague of mine, the publishing director of Glamour. She was appointed in January 2017, following a career across the business. Since then, she's led Glamour from a place of strength to a monthly brand, from a monthly brand to becoming a revolutionary digital-first product with a biannual print publication and additional touch points, including the Glamour Beauty Festival. Camila, welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about equality through the narrative of Glamour, because Glamour, from its very inception, was a very empowering brand. It launched in 2001 in the UK market, and the whole goal of Glamour was to talk about empowerment, talk about feminism, and to give women a voice. It recognized that women could talk about shoes and politics in the same breath, and they weren't mutually exclusive. I was looking through the launch issue in preparation for this talk, and there was an article in it called "Daddy, I Want a Porsche." So don't be fooled by the sexist headline. This feature actually told our readers how they could buy their own Porsche. They didn't need a daddy. They didn't need a sugar daddy. In fact, they could buy it themselves. And other helpful tips, like save on your morning cappuccino for 221 days. You can buy the Gucci handbag that you're also coveting. But what's really interesting is that thought was quite groundbreaking at the time. So Glamour was one of the innovators in the UK print women's lifestyle market. We launched a travel size publication, which was completely revolutionary at the time. And it was the magazine that fit into your lifestyle and fit into your handbag. And the idea was that you carried it around with you on the commute. You got your tips, your fashion, your beauty, your celebrity, your entertainment, and your fun. Now, of course, we're fast forwarding to today's age, and what's in everybody's handbag and pockets is their phones. So Glamour has had to evolve with that and go from being a 12-monthly print edition to actually, rather than straddling our audience to a 12-monthly print title, we thought, well, let's just go where they already are. We know our audience, the millennials, they're 18 to 35-year-old women. And rather than producing 24 pieces of content a month in a packaged print format, we're now doing 24 pieces of content daily online. And they're engaging with that across all of the social platforms. Glamour also was the first brand to launch Women of the Year. And this is a huge celebration of women's achievements. We had celebrities fly in from all over the world to London, where we were celebrating their achievements across film, across music, across television, across fashion and beauty. And it was a wonderful experience. But even in this empowering environment, we were a reflection of our times. And it's really interesting, I think, to see where we've come. So women's overriding hope, looking back on our launch issues and from the last 10 years, was to be thin, to have a great sex life, and to find the perfect man. If we cast our minds back again to our launch issue, our cover star was Kate Winslet. She wasn't talking about her own achievements. The cover line underneath her was, "Why my man is 1 in a million." Really interesting. There was very little diversity. We had one interview with the Asian actress Lucy Liu, and all the models were stick thin. They were retouched within an inch of their lives. They had to represent perfection in those days, what perfection was being perceived as. And although we never photographed fur, it was certainly did appear across our titles. Catwalk images had fur included in them. And unlike today, nobody was questioning this approach. This wasn't just glamour. This was the world of women's titles. This was the directive that we were giving out to hundreds and thousands of people in our audience. I looked at the glamour covers over the last 10 years. And out of 120 covers, only 8 of these showcased women of colour. That's 1 every 15 months. So saying all this, just to reiterate, this was a hugely popular mix. Glamour had to be reprinted to keep up demand of sales. We were selling over 600,000 copies a month, and that was the largest monthly title in the UK and really dominated that scene for many, many years. So 10 years ago, and even I would say 5 years ago, print was also very much part of our narrative. It was flourishing and it was seen as the future. We were talking about come and see us on the internet. We might be up to a few things over there, but it was a bit of an afterthought at most. And now we're looking at where we are in the present day and how we are interacting with our audience. In a post-Me Too world, things have really changed dramatically, even for a brand that's had empowerment always at the heart of its narrative. So Glamour, I would say now, is much more of an activist brand than it ever was before. Diversity gradually over the years has risen to the surface, and it's the staple of all the fashion and beauty shoots that we do. And the features are much more an honest reflection of the society that we are now living in. Instead of airbrushing shoots, we're celebrating women's bodies. We're asking our photographers to shoot as natural as possible and keep our representatives as natural as possible. Cellulite, baby hairs, stretch marks are not airbrushed out, which is a real celebration. We've got a beauty shoot in our recent issue. We're now biannual, and our spring-summer issue shows a body activist model called Charlie Howard, who actually was dropped by her model agency when she was a size 10 for being too large. She took a video of herself on YouTube and said, "This is ridiculous. You know, I'm actually starving myself when I'm too big." And her video went viral and got picked up by a lot of news ports. So we shot her, and we haven't air-touched her body at all. And it's a perfect example of how we're really embracing the real world and real representation of women. We've also really made sure that we've changed our language. So we no longer use any kind of language which represents imperfections in people's bodies. So we've actually got a list now of banned words that we can't use. Waistline, flawless, darker skin, darker than what? Diet, perfect skin, thin, imperfections are just a few examples. And in fact, if we do use this language, we get trolled by our audience. So we are digital first now as a brand, but 83% of that content is consumed on mobile. It's the highest mobile use out of all the UK brands at Condé Nast, and our audience simply won't tolerate it. They tell us everything, so that's really good, and it's a real move to how we have to engage with our audiences now all the time. We also support women against online hate and online criticism. A recent editorial campaign that we did was called Blend Out Bullying. And the idea was we asked celebrities and influencers to write with makeup on their bodies words that they had been trolled for online. So they wrote across their face or their bodies, fat, slag, bitch, saggy boobs, and then they blended these words out as if it was a makeup tutorial, which is what's incredibly popular in the beauty world and online. And it was incredibly popular. It gained a lot of traction. Celebrities, our readers, and influencers in their own right took it to join the campaign, posted their own videos with the hashtag #BlendOutBullying, and it was a really important full stop moment for Glamour to show that we have a voice and that we're standing up and we're really helping equality and really the empowerment representation of women. And it's also no longer a case of us telling our readers what we think or what we do. It's absolutely a two-way conversation. They're part of our conversation online, on Pinterest, on Instagram, on cross-social channels. When you're putting so much content up there, you're in a public platform, and they're really included along the way. And that's something that we've had to change the way we represent our content and include their work as well. We are also bringing men along with us, I must say. We have a lot of guys in the office, which is great, and we know that it's just as important to be inclusive across with men and women working together. I've got 2 sons. My eldest is 13, and he's the only boy in his feminism club at school, which I'm really proud about, but that's also a statistic that I'd really like to change, and I think we need to see more of that. So as Greg said, we've gone digital first. We now have an 8 million footprint on the Glamour brand in the UK, which I would not go back and swap for that 600,000 height of print success. And everything we do now has to be 360. So we're talking about experiences, and that's what brands are really after. They want authentic connectivity with our audience, which they want to be their audience, and everything has to have that live touch point. So we have introduced more festivals. Beauty is a real focus for Glamour, but everything we do at the festivals is an experience, and brands have to be there and interact and offer a service and be creative with the way that they are working with us. So looking to the future and the future of women's brands and the role and the responsibility that they have, we dream of a future where this body positive message, the styling, the inclusive language, and acceptance is the norm across all media. Where rather than being surprised that there's a plus size woman walking at Fashion Week, or there's a female politician, or a woman of color being highlighted in a tokenistic way as an example of achievement, this is should be accepted totally as the status quo. And I think just looking back at where we were at launch to where we are now, I think we've come a long way as a society, and that should be really celebrated. So it's a very exciting and challenging age to be part of a digital platform. And as we've reflected on earlier in these talks, the job that I have now just didn't exist when I was at school and when I was at university. My kids can't believe that I was at university without a mobile phone. I went traveling and couldn't contact anyone and didn't take pictures and post them. So the future for women within the digital media content platform is a very exciting one, and one that I'm proud to be involved with. Thank you.
Thanks, Camila. Thank you. So the past sort of few years, it's become apparent that there's going to be a massive shift coming over the next few years in terms of the way that population growth is going to occur, and we're going to see the establishment of cities that on the scale that we've never seen before. Largely in the developing world, we're going to see specifically, I mean, we've seen the growth of cities in Europe, North America. We're going to start seeing them, particularly in the next sort of 50 years in Africa. Just Lagos is forecast to be a city of 100 million people within the next sort of 60 or 70 years. We also see cities now taking on roles they haven't had before. When President Trump or the US had the Paris Climate Accord, many mayors in the US of large cities declared their support for the Paris Climate Accord and that they would adhere to it. We're also seeing cities in Europe in particular really thinking about how they're going to use data, how they're going to empower their citizens. So cities are going to be something that are going to be increasingly important to us in the coming years. By the end of the century, I think we're looking at about 80% of the world population are going to live in a city of some kind. So our next speaker, Michael Pacino, is a senior design researcher at Fjord, which is part of Accenture Interactive. He focuses on the urban researcher and environmental designer who focuses on the relationship between people, spaces, and technology. His work crosses the boundaries of traditional design disciplines in order to create enriched objects, spaces, and ideas. Michael's going to talk a little bit about the changing landscape of urban planning. Welcome, Michael. Great to have you here.
Great. It's nice to be here this morning. So it's fun to talk about cities because a little bit like our experience maybe with Lego, where every one of us has had an experience seeing it or playing with it or seeing our children or friends play with it. Obviously, our adult friends still playing with Legos, maybe a little bit. It's so nice because cities are the kind of thing that we all experience on a day-to-day basis, and we all have different sort of backgrounds in. Maybe before I get started, I'd like to ask a question. So how many of you actually live in cities here? I know I, for one, do. Yeah, so most people tend to live in cities. But what's so interesting about cities is that they are all so completely different from one another. Right now, about 54% of people in the world live in urban areas. So about half the people in the world tend to be built up urban areas. But that is changing dramatically, and that's been changing for a while. So when we talk about cities, and we talk about today's theme, and we talk about this idea of 10 years, we could actually back up and say, well, what about 10,000 years ago? Because cities are the kind of thing that have been around for so long, and maybe some of the trends are reoccurring. But maybe rather than sit here and talk about 10,000 years ago and say, oh, the future is going to be aqueducts, water delivered right to your door, or the future is going to be walls to prevent the invaders from coming in. Sounds a little bit familiar with some things, as you mentioned. We're going to really focus on the past 10 years. But cities don't change all that much. I mean, they change a lot, but actually a lot of the concepts that they face and a lot of the things that we're really looking at tend to be a bit cyclical. They tend to reoccur over and over again. So when we look back 10 years ago, what we're going to find is actually a lot of the concepts are the same as now, but with a slightly different twist as a result of what we learned. So as I was saying about right now, 54% of the world lives in cities. So again, half of us live in urban areas. But in the 1950s, that number was about 30%. So about 1 in 3 people at that time. And in about 20 years' time, that number is going to rise dramatically. It's going to go up to about 68%. Okay, so these are all percentages. I can try and make a line graph with my arm, but nobody's really going to get it. It's early in the morning. We don't have slides. To give you an idea of what that means is by 2050, we're going to have about the same amount of people living in cities that there are on this planet today. So it's a lot of people in cities. It's a lot of people moving in cities. As you rightly pointed out, about 90% of that growth is going to happen in places like Asia and Africa. Whereas in places like Europe and North America, South America, there's going to be a continual push of people moving back into urban areas from rural communities. That's a lot of people. It's a lot. And to give you an idea of what that means, the cities of New York, Shanghai, Beijing, and Tokyo, together, those are going to require about $8 trillion in investment over the next 10 years alone to keep up with demand. So it's a lot of people, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of shifting, and it's a lot of changing. And this is happening at a really difficult time, but an interesting time. One where we're facing potential catastrophes, and one where we're going to actually have to respond better. So cities are the place where about 85% of global GDP comes from them. So they generate a lot of wealth, they bring a lot of money, they do a lot of things. They're obviously, the rock bed of a lot of the world and where the economies come from. But at the same point, cities consume about 3/4 of the world's natural resources, and about 80%, they output about 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So what we say and what we look at when we think about this is that if we're going to fix some of these problems that the world's facing, we're going to turn things around, we need to start with the places that we live. We need to start with cities, and we need to consider what that means. So 10 years ago, we looked back and we said, what was going on in cities at that time? And what's funny about this is we're seeing a lot of the same things that we're actually facing right now. So 10 years ago, the big thing was the emergence of this thing called the smart city. Have any of you heard of this term before, the smart city? Yeah, it's one of these terms that's not really going away, and that we're stuck with. And actually, as 10 years has gone by, we probably know less about actually what a smart city actually is, because it gets you asking these questions which maybe you've never thought to ask, like, oh, well, what is smart? Or what is intelligence? Or what does this even mean? And it becomes all a bit abstract and all a bit vague as time goes on. It's said so often, in fact, that it just loses its meaning. It's said so often that it doesn't really become anything else. About 10 years ago, we didn't really know what it was. 10 years ago was a point where I was just starting as a young architect. I was working in Chicago. We were obsessed with the idea of data in the city. We didn't know how to use it. We didn't know what it meant, but we were trying anyway. What a smart city is, to give you a definition of this, it's usually thought of as a way to make city services more efficient and more effective for citizens within them. It's often thought of as top-down. It comes of a way of how can we make parking easier within a city? How can we collect tax easier? How can we distribute energy in a more efficient manner throughout the city? It's very much thought of as improving the services that exist within us today. And again, this is one of these terms that's said so often that it's gone. It's lost its meaning. So right now on Google, if you look on it, there's about 100,000 searches per month today for smart cities. Now, if you go back 10 years ago, that number was smaller, but it was rapidly growing at that time. And on Google News, I think they've got archived 214 million different news articles about the concept of smart cities in various languages, which is a lot of reporting on it, a lot of talking about it. And still, there's a lot of questions that we really don't know. Some people are going to tell you, if you look at some of these articles and you think about what people say, they're going to say smart cities are going to save us. Smart cities are the answer to the solution to the problems that we're facing right now. Smart cities will solve the environmental crisis. They'll make water efficiency improve. They'll make sure that we get around in more seamless ways, more sustainable matters. Many of these people, they might be right. Some people will tell you a different story. They might tell you smart cities are going to be a $2.5 trillion industry by 2025. They're going to rapidly grow. There's lots of opportunities. There's lots of new services that can be offered in there. They also might be right. Some people might take a different approach. They might say smart cities are the new big brother. Smart cities are going to track us. Smart cities are going to follow us around. Smart cities is just a nice bezeled, coded, Instagrammable thing that actually finds out where we're going and harvests all this data. They also might be right. There's a lot of views on what these things mean. So what's happened in the past 10 years is we've looked at this idea of smart cities, and we've thought more and more about it. We've tried things out. A lot of stuff has worked, and a lot of stuff hasn't. There have been data collection points put up in cities to collect data on weather and atmospheric data, traffic conditions, and things like that. A lot of data has been released. So if any of you use apps like CityMapper, those are due in part due to more data being released from smarter cities. So all of this is kind of coming to a head, and it's becoming a thing that's actually taking shape a bit more. But that phrase, smart cities, still isn't going away, and we still don't exactly know what it means. And we've realized something over the past few years, and as we look forward to the future, and we look forward to the next 10 years and think about what that is, we don't think it's smart cities. We think actually smart cities go the wrong way around. Smart cities often imply a top-down approach. It's technology that's made to make cities more efficient. It's technology that's put in place because it exists, because it's a technology that we have. It's often sometimes born of questions like, hey, we have blockchain, let's put it in a city and see what happens. And maybe there's not really consideration for actually what that means. What we think the future is, what we think this is for cities, is actually smart cities, but from another perspective. And that's something that we call inventive cities. So inventive cities, rather than the top-down approach, which technology, again, is applied to a place, it's actually a bottom-up movement. It's born a bit out of the maker movement, which happened quite a number of years ago, but it's still going strong. It's born a little bit about the open source movement. It's born out of the distribution of technology and the distribution of being able to know how to do these things and experiment with them. So our belief is this bottom-up approach. And we think cities of the future, there'll be a few different things. They'll be more accessible. We have a rapidly aging population in a lot of the world, and our cities right now are not designed for those people. It's hard to get around. There's lots of problems. We've spoken to people from Boston to Shanghai to Ho Chi Minh. We did a study in recently. And all over the world, what tends to happen is people talk about the problems that they're facing with getting around as they get older. Sidewalks and pavements that are cracked and broken. Street lights that don't change fast enough and put them in dangerous situations. But there's no outlet for this right now. So I'll give you an example of this. So I cycle to work most every day in London. Some of you might do the same thing, or you might drive, or you might walk, or you might take the train. But I was cycling the other day, and I was going around a new roundabout that was built in London. And it's one of these special areas where it's a bike lane. It's a segregated bike lane, so it's off the street. And it's got lights that change for you for the bicyclists coming through them. But as I was cycling through it, what I had realized is that the light changed too quickly for me, and cars constantly would fly through it and almost hit people. So almost every week I'd see 2 or 3 people nearly hit by a car in that intersection. It's really bad. And this is a brand new area where the city's investing a lot of money into it. And as I continued to cycle, after then I went through a park and I would cycle through it, I was thinking to myself, how do we fix this? So how do I report this as being a problem? Because this is a brand new thing which the city spent a lot of money on, but there's not really a way to report it. And the ways are really old-fashioned right now. I could go to a local council meeting. I'd have to apply for it. I'd have to raise it as an issue. I could write a letter to my MP, or an email, so a little bit more digital. But there's still no way of noting these things, and there's still a bit of a laziness that occurs on my end, because I passed through it, I said, well, I didn't get hit by a car today. I'll probably come back to it another day, and maybe I'll do the same thing tomorrow. And this is the ground-up thing that's happening. So right now, what's happening is cities are becoming more and more connected. They're allowing for more input from citizens to actually report these kind of things. That's only just starting right now. But our hope is that we're going to see more ground-up movements. So when we talk about accessibility, when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about the input that we have in making cities a better place, we're going to see more of that. So for the future, the city is really ground up. And it's brought from people, it's brought from distributed technologies. It's a smart city, but rather than the smart city being given to you, it's about how people make the smart city themselves, and they contributed to it.
Great, thank you so much. So we're running a little bit over time now, so if you do need to kind of make a move, please do. But we have one more amazing speaker this morning. So we run a healthcare conference at Wired every year in March. And this year we had an amazing sort of event where someone we'd written about, a company called Google DeepMind, which is an artificial intelligence company, came on stage and they talked about work that they've been doing with Piers Keane, who is an ophthalmologist, at the... You need to make a move, Julia. Sorry to lose you, but thank you so much for coming this morning.
Thank you.
And Piers had basically seen a story in Wired, and he had partnered with DeepMind, and they were able to build an AI application where they were able to spot conditions like macular degeneration with a higher efficiency than trained humans are able to. This is just a kind of way of explaining that healthcare really, I think, is one of those industries which has been affected by technology in ways that I think really is most impactful in our lives. Our next speaker is the lead of the Angels Institute. I'm going to put my glasses on because I can't get my screen big enough. In Boehringer, Ingelheim. So in December 2013, a close family member of Jan's suffered a stroke, and this led him to launch the Angels initiative with the company in order to improve acute stroke care. And today Jan is going to cover some of the advances in healthcare technology that you've witnessed this and share maybe some details of his personal story that led to the launch of the initiative. So please do welcome Yong Van Der Meer.
Thank you very much. So it's a good thing actually that the lady from Lego just left, because on Sunday I actually had a healthcare issue when I was just putting my daughter to bed and put off the light and tried to sneak out and stepped on a piece of Lego.
Yeah.
So that was...
We've all been there.
We've all been there, so I don't have a solution for that yet. There's a lot of advances in healthcare. It's an exciting time to be alive, and there's so many things happening. Too much to mention in a 10 minutes talk, but I'll mention a few. For example, these days it's possible for orthopedic surgeon to do 3D printing of a prosthesis. So if you have to have a hip or knee replacement, it's possible for this doctor to take a picture of your joint and by the millimeter design the prosthesis that he has to put into you, and obviously make it much more efficient and much more comfortable for the patient that gets it. There are also it's possible these days to print arteries and even a pancreas. I think a lot of people at this conference hopes that soon it will be possible to print livers as well, but I'm not sure that we are there yet. There's other things. Medicine is getting much more personal these days. For patients with cancer or rheumatoid arthritis, for example, it's possible to do gene coding and by your genes decide which specific therapies and which doses to give you, making these medicines much more effective and obviously saving millions and millions of lives into the future. Studying to be a doctor these days is very different from what it used to be a couple of years ago. So doctors are able to use virtual reality to see what it is that they are supposed to know and know to study. There's apps, for example, that do 3D modeling of the whole body, and you can click on a layer and the skin disappears, or you can get to wherever you want. So it's much easier to learn these things. Virtual reality is also used, for example, for surgeons to prepare their surgery and to make sure that when they are doing the surgery, that they are much more prepared and that they know what to do. It's also used to calm down patients before surgery, and also very effectively in doing rehabilitation of patients with disabilities, for example. Telemedicine is becoming a big thing. I'm thinking of companies like Babylon Health, for example, that are making a massive difference in the UK. So what happens is you might have some disease, you go to their platform, there's an algorithm that takes you through some questions, and then based on what the algorithm tells you, you might either be given some advice, or you could be taken through to a virtual call, or not a virtual call, a call on FaceTime or something with a doctor, who could then write you a script and send you your medicine through the post in the next hour or so, which obviously reduces waiting time, it reduces the burden on doctors and on the healthcare system, and also can save a lot of time and money. Colleagues of mine in Canada have just recently launched the first ever clinical trial using blockchain technology, which they are very excited about. Apparently it will reduce the cost and the time to do clinical trials by a lot, and make it easier so that everyone has access to the data that they need, and also to do something which is apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently quite difficult, which is to get informed consent from patients, in terms of to actually use their data in the clinical trial. I see a lot of people with Apple Watches. Wearable technology is also, something that is absolutely growing these days. It's possible for an old person who falls, that the watch detects it and even phones for help if they don't get up quickly. Just last year, Apple also got the FDA approval for the Apple Watch to actually pick up signs of atrial fibrillation. It's not in Europe yet, but I tell you, if I have AF, I want to know it, because if you have AF, the chances of you having quite a severe stroke is increased by 500%. The problem with all these technologies, and this is for me where we are today, is that even though there's amazing new technologies, it's at the moment still only accessible by the select few in many cases. And I want to illustrate this point by giving you an example about something that I know a little bit more about, which is stroke care. Now, stroke is quite important. It's the third biggest cause of death in the world, and the first biggest cause of disability. So I want to give you just a really quick story, or a really quick history about stroke care. So there's a lot of advances also in stroke care, but it all started, the first big advance was in the 60s. So between 60 and 67, they actually realized that if you put stroke patients in a dedicated ward, they call a stroke unit, that they can improve the outcomes of these patients. There was not much else they could do at that point, but at least if you look at them, you treat them with doctors and nurses that are specialized, you can have better outcomes. In 1999, stroke became an emergency, because before that, there was nothing that you could do. You could, put patients in a corner or something and look at them, but there's nothing to get rid of this blood clot, that is actually causing the stroke. So in 1999, a clot-busting therapy was launched and brought onto the market that for the first time made it possible to do something in the acute phase about stroke. The next big advance came in 2015, when it was possible, or when a mechanical thrombectomy was launched. So what you can do now is, for patients with really big strokes and big clots, they can go in through the groin with a catheter and go all the way up and either pull out or suck out this clot. And this is unbelievable because those big clots are typically not responding to pharmacological interventions. So those patients, it might be a patient that is totally disabled, going into the hospital, that walks out of the hospital the next day, because of this technology. Just last year and this year, the guidelines have been updated again, where it's now possible, because of artificial intelligence and advanced software that help us look at the brain and the imaging in a different way, that they can choose patients specifically for therapy that might be treated now because there's still some salvageable brain left, even up to 24 hours. That was not possible in the past. So you might be fooled to think, okay, so it's also a lot of advances happening over there, and it's fine and dandy and no problem. But I learned it, as was mentioned before, in 2013, that it's actually not the truth. So my mom-in-law, on the 1st of December, suffered a stroke. And she was at the hospital within half an hour. Everything up until that point was fine, and we were hopeful. But it took 7 hours for a nurse to decide for the first time that it's maybe a good idea to do a brain scan. By that time, it was obviously way too late to do any therapy. She was out of the window. Also, the stroke had transformed into a hemorrhagic stroke by that time because the pressure was too much. She spent more than a month in ICU, had to eventually get a portion of her skull cut open to reduce the pressure. So it was really, really bad. And I looked at this and I said, obviously, all the evidence-based guidelines, everything that we know from the 60s already, have not been implemented in this case. How is it possible in today's date? And I looked at it a little bit further, and I realized in the country, I'm from South Africa originally, that in South Africa in the year 2013, out of a potential 130,000 stroke patients, only 50 received guideline-recommended treatments. That's 0.04% implementation of guidelines. I looked at it further, so in what we call the developing world or emerging markets, it was also less than 1% implementation of guidelines. In Europe at that time, only a third of stroke patients were treated or admitted to a stroke unit somewhere in their treatment, which is again something that we know from evidence from the 60s already worked. So I decided to do something about it. I said, so this is really ridiculous. If you think about it, we spend so much time and effort on developing drugs and therapies and developing guidelines, and then people just don't go and implement it. They just do what they want with it. If you think about it, there's data in the US that says that every year 400,000 patients die because of preventable medical errors. In other words, 400,000 patients die every year because people are not implementing the evidence that is there, things that should have been done. That is the equivalent of 2 Boeings, 2 jumbo jets falling every single day. Now, all of us have to fly home, I guess, so I'm not sure that we would have so many people over here if 2 planes were flying every day as a norm, but still we have to rely on the healthcare system out there. So I decided together with a colleague of mine to start the Angels Initiative to fix this, or to at least do our part in it. And we focused on stroke, and we focused on nothing else than implementing the guidelines. We forgot about all our brands. We forgot about implementing and selling stuff. We said all we have to do is to make doctors better at what they do. We have to help them get as close to 100% implementation of guidelines. So far, we've got around 2,900 hospitals in our initiative in 96 countries. In Europe alone, there's 155 hospitals today that are treating stroke patients or starting to treat them according to guidelines that never did so before. Where I come from in South Africa, we started with only 5 hospitals in 2014 that are equipped to treat stroke patients. Today, there's 126. We estimate that if we look at all the hospitals across the world and the average number of patients that they treat, that if we can get all of these hospitals to treat patients according to guidelines and to the best available evidence of the day, we could save 300,000 patients every year from death or permanent disability just with what we are doing. We are working with a lot of different partners. We have people that that we are working with, that have experience in stuff that we don't. We have close to 90 different individual solutions. Some of them as advanced as artificial intelligence, or to read CT scans, or virtual reality software to teach doctors how to treat patients. We have stopwatch app that was developed together with Accenture actually to help doctors time themselves and make sure that they are quicker in treating patients. But we also have very basic things like a bag, to organize themselves, or a checklist. And you might think, what is a checklist? It's actually been proven in the US that in venous line infections that where there's about 30 to 60,000 patients dying in the US every year with venous line infections, that a 5-point checklist brought in the mortality rates from venous line infections down from 11% to 0, and saved $100 million in a portion of 18 months just in the state of Michigan. So if you do this, and if you are actually focusing not necessarily just on technology first, but trying to solve the problem and making sure that the basics are in place and make sure that it's impossible to do the wrong thing, you can save lives and also save money. And then if you do that, if you have the systems in place and you have a good baseline, then it becomes possible, and there is money available for all these other technologies that that could be implemented that perhaps is not implemented today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, yeah. Thank you. So I'm aware that we're kind of running short of time. Do we have time for a few questions? Like, what's the timing? I can't hear. It's nearly 11. So what's the verdict? Have we got time for questions or? Yeah, a couple of questions. So I wanted to ask, does anyone want to raise their hand to ask a question, first of all? If not, I'm going to ask one. So I'd love to get into the tech bit a little bit in terms of voice, that shift away. Sorry, gentleman there, why don't you ask a question?
So my question is Alexandra, you brought it up. It's sort of looking forward 10 years, and then it's very interesting also for me around cities, is a question of trust. And so one of the things I think we've probably seen in the last few years is a disintegration of trust in institutions, and I want to understand where you think that will go going forward.
Absolutely. So I probably didn't emphasize enough the need for trust. We're starting to see some bias. I mean, some bias in artificial intelligence today that we are addressing through technology. I think that trust in itself is a key requirement for adoption, and technology can enable trust in really new ways today. So we talked about blockchain earlier. I think this is one aspect of it. The way we design experiences and the way we leverage emerging technologies will actually allow to build even more trust. But I think today we're at a tipping point. I think most of us are starting to realize the potential or sometimes the actual negative effects of technology. And there's going to be a need to integrate trust at the very early stage of the way we design experiences.
Okay. Michael, maybe I can bring you in here, talking about data and trust. We've seen cities like Barcelona have decided to cancel contracts with large tech companies, try and create a data commons so that data can be shared throughout the city to create services that actually benefit citizens rather than an extractive for kind of private enterprise. Do you see that continue?
Yeah, exactly. I think we are at a really good point because trust has become really important when we design digital services like this. Like we said earlier, an example I gave was CityMapper. So CityMapper is doing a really good thing where in London, London is sharing their transportation data open. It's basically they turned it into all these APIs, which means people could see the data in real time and could work with it. CityMapper then used that data and actually spotted holes in the transportation network and then partnered with TfL to give back that data. So there's a strong trust relationship between them, but also a trust in the service because it's not necessarily taking, it's data that's providing you some sort of thing in response. So it's more open.
Data becomes transactional rather than extracted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think another good example of this for blockchain is Estonia. So Estonia right now has a huge digital services movement that's going on where they want to turn all of their government services digital.
Yeah.
And it's great because they don't think of it as big brother, they think of it as little brother, which you can kick around and push around and tell what to do.
They also have very strong privacy laws then.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's where we're seeing a shift in the future, and I think that's where we need to be headed.
Yeah, yeah. So Camila, in terms of trust, obviously you're building a brand around sort of social. Do you see changes in attitude around sort of the platforms that your readers are using?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in the way that they can talk to us so immediately, I mean, we wrote about a lip balm yesterday that had ingredients in it that weren't environmentally friendly, and we get called to action. We get called to task with everything we do because our messaging is very much about activism, sustainability, sustainable fashion, eco-friendly beauty, and if we trip up, that trust there gets pulled up and we get asked to be accountable for all of the content. And I think that's a good thing because it makes us better at what we do. And the role of a media brand is to embrace your audience and to keep them close and to be their best friend. They will come to you for advice and they will trust your editors if you hold your hands up when you get it wrong and if they can see that conversation. And I think that will stand brands in good stead to keep that trust close. And then again, that would attract advertising to want to align with that platform.
Just on that trust piece that's coming down the line, Jan, we see increasingly consumers are willing to give up data in order to sort of have efficiencies within the healthcare system. Where do you think that the relationship with most people have with healthcare is with their kind of their physician, with the primary healthcare professional? What do you think the role of that person is going to be in the future?
It's getting very different. So a patient comes to a room and he's got the diagnosis already from Dr. Google. So or he thinks he's got it. So it's quite difficult to be a doctor even these days. Because you have to ride with what the patients are telling you. But in the same time, it's quite exciting also. So Patients Like Me is an organization where patients can donate their data, and so that clinical trials and research can be done with this data. And the shift is moving. So back into the power of patients. So with more data, more advances can come, and more things can happen, or you can figure out which drugs actually work for different types of people. So I think to a certain extent, a lot of people are complaining about privacy and are putting all sorts of laws in place. But if you look at what a lot of patients are doing, it's the total opposite. So if you have a serious disease and you want a solution for that, you don't care so much about keeping your data private. Okay, there's a concern that a lot of people are saying, if the insurers know that I've got a specific disease or whatever, they might, push up my amount that I have to pay to them every month or something, which I guess is a concern. But again, if we look at the way that patients themselves are responding with their data, it's very different.
So maybe Glenn could have the final word on this. Like when you're working with clients and you're thinking about trust, have things changed over the last few years? Is there much more sensitivity to this and consumers expecting a lot more from brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a good way maybe to wrap this up, and healthcare is one of the best examples. It's quite inspiring what you're doing, by the way. It's wonderful to see. But if you think about this idea, there's a value quotient that exists. So in any brand, when we talked earlier, we were saying that you have to find some meaning or some reason for people to care and engage. But the trust factor is a big part of that. So if you just take the physician, a regular person, you just go for a physical. I mean, think of what you're willing to do. I mean, you'll go there. You'll wait a while, usually. You'll get completely naked and sit on a table and tell them every detail about your life and your family history and personal things, all because you know that if you do, you'll get a better diagnosis and you trust that professional. The value is huge, what you get back to be able to protect you and your family. And so people are willing to give up all sorts of things if the value is equal to what they're giving up. So this is something for brands to think about. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that when we were joking around about the difference between converting a customer or helping one, I think that the biggest tool and the most powerful thing is not for a marketer or an advertiser or any brand is not going to be any technology that we talked about, and it won't be the strategies that we were mentioning. The most important tool will be empathy. And when Accenture Interactive talks to clients about experiences, we say it's the big E, and it really does stand for empathy and emotion and some kind of connection that matters. So experience with purpose, built on trust, should be paramount when we're doing any of that, and that comes from what kind of value actually delivering that's important to that customer, not to the business. So we don't talk to our clients so much about the value, well, we'll help you sell more stuff, or we'll help you do it more efficiently. We're saying, well, how can we help you help the end customer? And that is a whole different mindset. And
I just add on to that. So this is something that was actually blown my mind. You know, I've been in the industry for almost 20 years now as a salesperson, marketeer, and all these sort of things. And when we started this, we had a lot of distrust from doctors in the beginning, coming to say, okay, you know, you want to just sell some. What is the catch? You know, what is it that you are trying to sell over here? And it took us some time to actually convince them that no, we don't want to sell everything. We are here to make you better at what you do. And once the penny actually dropped, it's unbelievable how these people are working with us and what they are trusting us to do. It's a massively different relationship, something that I've not seen in 18 years of this industry. You know, so where people are allowing you to partner with them, and you know, where they are allowing you. At the end of the day, everyone benefits. You know, but they realize that you are there just for them, not necessarily with something that you want to sneak in the back. It's unbelievably powerful.
So we can talk about blockchain, we can talk about AR, we can talk about, you know, deep learning, but fundamentally it always comes back to the human being. I'd like to thank our panelists here today. Thank you for everything you've tried to tell us, and we look forward to the next 10 years. We're going to have you back in 2029 to see if you were right.